Hello, my name is Mike Walker, and I apologize that I am doing my presentation for you this way through a pre-recorded video. Unfortunately, I came down with COVID-19, and on the advice of my healthcare providers, I am supposed to self-isolate and shouldn't certainly be around people in an indoor environment. So for all of our concern and safety, wasn't able to come down to the conference in person. But that said, I'm going to try to do the best job I can. I am currently an instructor in the online program at the Los Angeles Film School, which is based in Los Angeles, but I actually live in Florida. The research that I'm presenting today, I conducted when I was still a graduate student at the Savannah College of Art and Design, and also when I was working in the curatorial program of the Harn Museum of Art at the University of Florida. Now, I am going to deviate a little bit from my written paper here, just in interest of, the unique circumstances of presenting this way. My presentation is entitled Creating an Exotic Tropicality, Design, Architecture, and Communication in the Mid-Century Florida Beach Hotel Experience. Now, this is drawing somewhat on previous research I've presented at the 2020 annual meeting of the Vernacular Architecture Forum, which was in San Antonio, Texas, but more emphasis expectedly on architecture and technical aspects than the cultural aspects I'm going to be talking about today. And how I got interested in this whole topic of the tropical Polynesian, Hawaiian hotel motel experience in Florida is because I'm also an avid surfer, and I often surf around Daytona Beach. And when I'd spend the night there, it would often be in a mid-20th century beachside motel, and many of them did have sort of a Hawaiian, or in the case of a couple we're going to talk about, a decidedly Polynesian theme. I took this picture from my surfboard out there in the Atlantic Ocean of Daytona. So at one time I learned that Hawaiian everything was kind of all the rage, well, across America, but in the mid-20th century, especially in Florida. And here we have a fine example. This is a postcard from a motel that I'm afraid sadly no longer with us, but it was in Miami Beach. And this postcard, I'm guessing by the lovely lady there in the lower left-hand corner's hairdo, it probably dated from the 1960s of that bouffant hairdo. But what I really want to draw your attention to in this picture is in the lower right-hand corner, you have this hula show, and you have a hula dancers and tiki mask wall decor there and other attributes that are giving sort of a Polynesian theme to that dinner show. And we're going to talk about those dinner shows a bit more as well. So how did all this come to be? Well, to understand that, don't mean to make you hungry, but we need to talk about the crab rangoon, which is pictured there on the left. The crab rangoon, by its name, Rangoon being a city in Burma, you would think came from Southeast Asia. But food historians, some of my favorite people, food and culinary foodways historians, have found that isn't the case at all. The crab rangoon was actually the invention of a gentleman named Victor Bergeron and his chef, Chef Young, that they concocted for Victor Bergeron's restaurant you may have heard of, Trader Vic's, the original Trader Vic's in Oakland, California. And they wanted Asian-themed appetizer. They created one that has become quite a favorite. You can find them all over the United States and beyond in Chinese restaurants, especially on the appetizer menu today. Now, food historians noted that, the classic recipe for this is it's deep fried wonton wrapper filled with crab or something like crab, imitation crab in some cases, and cream cheese. And cream cheese was really not an ingredient known or used in Burmese or Chinese or other Asian cuisines in the mid-20th century, or certainly before. However, cream cheese was very prevalent in American cuisine. So they created something and sold it. Victor Bergeron sold it, and for a long time kept the story that it was something he encountered on his travels and adventures in Southeast Asia and Polynesia, which is kind of interesting to me. He created something that's a classic and went far wide and beyond his own restaurant And yet he wanted to sort of give credit to someone else. At one time, supposedly even said that an old Burmese lady gave him her secret recipe to take back and put in his restaurant. And, really it was he and his chef that created this. But even before Victor Bergeron, there were other people who were mining Polynesian tropes and ideas for a source of entertainment and a conception of exotic. And no one did better than the film director and producer King Vidor in his 1930s pre-code film Bird of Paradise. And the gist of the plot is that a Western sailor is marooned on this exotic Polynesian tropical island. He meets a beautiful local girl and falls in love, of course. And of course, she is the daughter of a local chieftain, and she's already betrothed to the prince of another island. So all kinds of drama and trials and tribulations ensue. Now, Trader Vic, going back to him, Victor Bergeron and his wife went on a little vacation to Los Angeles, where they went to a restaurant called Don the Beachcombers, and they were taken with the Polynesian ambiance and food and attributes of that restaurant. And Victor Bergeron already had successful restaurants in Oakland, but he turned to his wife. He said, honey, as soon as we get home, we're going to change everything and renovate the menu and our focus so it's Polynesian, because this is the way to go. Don the Beachcomber, for his part, was so enchanted by all this that he had legally changed his name to Don Beach. So that was actually his name. He was so, interested in being Don the Beachcomber. And between these two gentlemen, Don Beach and Victor Bergeron, as Trader Vic, tiki culture was pretty much born. Tiki culture as we know it, with the drinks and sort of the kitsch and everything. When you say tiki, you think of, came from these guys. But it's expanded since then. And even the concept of a trader coming from Victor Bergeron's Trader Vic's name, you'll see a lot of places called Trader this, Trader that, sometimes just traders, such as the restaurant and tiki lounge at the Aku Tiki Motel in Daytona Beach, which is still there, and my favorite place to stay when I go there. Now, why was this? What cultural forces and historical forces allowed this to be? Well, the tiki era really came into being, even though there were pre-World War II influences, such as we saw with Bird of Paradise, the movie. The fact that servicemen, soldiers and sailors were coming back from the South Pacific Theater with some experience island hopping and encountering these cultures and actually being in these places, and then having, in the economic boom of the 1950s, having the money and affluence to travel and take their families on road trips, maybe not overseas, maybe not actually to Hawaii, but they could travel some and experience leisure, which they connotated with this tropical kind of experience. The Kon-Tiki expedition, which was in 1947, was a Norwegian-led project to retrace the travel by boat of Pacific Islanders in Polynesia, and how Polynesia was sort of colonized by people from other islands. That captivated the collective imagination as well, and further cemented this focus on Polynesia in the South Pacific. So in Daytona, you had a number of these Polynesian or Hawaiian named and themed motels, such as the Royal Hawaiian, which sadly is no longer with us, or the Makai, which I believe was originally called something else, but is still there. You can see some Polynesian aesthetic influence in the curvature of that roof, but a lot of the aesthetics we're looking at here comes from something called Guji architecture, doo-wop architecture, came out of Los Angeles. It was very prevalent in LA and Las Vegas, especially in the 1950s, with emphasis on atomic age and space age, new technologies, new materials, and a push forward into the future, everything supposedly being futuristic. We see that with the materials here, and certainly the floor-to-ceiling use of that glass facade for the office area. Now, my favorite, I mentioned, that has this Trader's restaurant and tiki lounge is the Aku Tiki Inn. You see it in early postcard of it around when it opened, probably. They're wonderful find I found online on the right-hand side. And then for comparison, I have a picture I took in 2019 of how it appears now. It is now a Best Western. And since sometime in the 1960s, since it first opened, they added this Easter Island inspired edifice on the sign. And this guy, his eyes aren't just painted red, they actually light up and glow red at night. And I am told at one time he shot fire out of his head. I guess there's some sort of gas burner or something in there. That no longer functions, sadly enough. But what I really want to draw your attention to here is the very blatant facadism at play, that you have this Polynesian architecture that is basically tacked in the form of the lobby, office, and porte cochere, just tacked onto a very modern 1960s, very pragmatic hotel building. In fact, if we walk around the corner there, the ocean's on the other side. This is the street side facing A1A. We walk around towards the ocean side of it, we get this. If you're down on the beach looking up, coming back to your hotel, this is what you see of an Aku Tiki. And there's not much that's very Aku and not much that's very Tiki about this. This is very pragmatic, straightforward 1950s and 1960s hotel architecture. You have those, I'm sure, at a premium price, oceanfront rooms with the large balconies, and everything is designed to maximize the tourist experience here. So when you first come here, you're greeted saying, welcome into this experience. We'll take you even beyond sunny Florida to exotic Polynesia. And then you have all the comforts that you would expect. Here you have on the left-hand side a detail from that Trader's Lounge. Interior, thankfully, some of the original wall sculptures and tiki details are still there. And sorry, on the right-hand side, you have this album. I have not heard the album, but I found this album cover online. This is an album apparently by Bruce West, who was a jazz organist in the 1960s at an establishment called Julian's Dining Room and Lounge, which is in Ormond Beach, just north of Daytona. Apparently, Julian's was a place to go and see and be seen, go out for a nice night on the town for several decades. They only closed sometime in the 2000s, and very sadly, the building has been torn down. Local preservationists tried to fight to save it, but in the end, it was torn down. I was fortunate to at least get some pictures of the exterior in 2019 before they tore it down, I believe, in 2020. But you can definitely see the Polynesian influence here. And I never dined there myself, but I've talked to several people who did and said the cuisine was kind of Chinese American, definitely had the crab rangoons, but you could get steak and lobster, excuse me, steak and lobster for your main course. So it was about giving patrons what they want. It was about giving them the ambiance of this tiki exoticism of Polynesia. But was the cuisine authentic? No. It was giving them what people wanted in the mid-20th century. And when you think about Florida in leisure, this is an important idea of giving people what they wanted, because Florida tourism is our biggest industry, and leisure is something that's sort of synonymous with, with the state. So you have a very typical Florida leisure pastime here being out boating and fishing. This is at Fanning Springs on the Swanee River. But you also have another side of Florida tourism and leisure, which began even in the early 20th century with things like the classic Art Deco hotels in Miami's South Beach. And people developing tourism in Daytona certainly knew about things like the L. Murray Dixon and other swank architects in their hotels there, but they didn't want something that was quite that high class. They knew what they had to work with. They had a beautiful, pristine beach that in good weather looks like this. What more could you want? Good surfing, like I said, my friends and I are over there surfing all the time. Some of the best surfing in Florida. Nice sandy beach. It's a nice place to bring your family. Pack up, mom and dad and the kids, maybe grandparents and uncle and aunt and whatever, and come down for a week at the beach. It's family friendly, unlike the nightclub kind of atmosphere of Miami South Beach. This is very much for the kids as well. And Daytona wanted to take that and run with it, and they really have. That now you see those sort of odd towers sticking up there. Those are part of an amusement park ride. And then you have in the background some newer contemporary hotel and condo buildings. Daytona knows what it's about. It's about fun, it's about tourism, it's about the accommodations necessary in forms of hotels and condos, such as this condo high rise, probably from the 1980s or 90s. But it's also about the idea of moving through this environment and extending what the environment, just as Daytona itself offers, into something else. And that something else often did become a Hawaiian or Polynesian theme. And just tropicality in general, these bright colors that a lot of the commercial buildings are painted. I'm also seeing a lot of residences there. It's not just a commercial thing. It's not just strictly for tourism, but people are actually having fun with their houses. How can you not when you have a manatee holding your mailbox? But you come back to this Polynesian theme, and this is a wonderful example from the Hawaiian Inn, which is still standing. This is, in aesthetics, Polynesian inspired, but it's a pork cochere that is the size of Texas. I mean, you could get a number of land yacht size Ford Galaxies or large Chryslers, those kind of cars under this easily. It's huge, because it was accommodating the burgeoning automobile culture that facilitated the tourism of the mid-20th century. Also, at the same Hawaiian Inn, we do still have a hula-based Hawaiian dinner show, and this is the theater that's housed in. Again, you're drawing on tropes. You're drawing on a fantasy of what the South Pacific is all about. There's not cultural authenticity here. I would say not even direct cultural appropriation, but a Disney-esque building of fantasy. And we see this as even pre-Disney when we think about things like the movie Bird of Paradise. This is coming from in Florida, we tend to think Disney, but it's coming from other people's ideas as well. And a lot of it is also just this reference of being at the sea, being at the beach. And we may take that in Florida for granted, but if you come from Kansas or somewhere, or Ohio, on a road trip, this may be the only time once a year you get to be at the beach and see the sea. So I like to call this, even though the actual name is the Seascape Inn, I call it dolphins everywhere. If you go inside, there's even more dolphins. Don't start counting them or you'll be there a while. Here we have a Mango Sun, breakfast, lunch, and tiki bar. So they've got the tiki bar there as well. And again, these words used to be evocative and connotative: sun, trade winds, ocean breeze, makes you think you're in the tropics. And the Guji architecture comes back in too. This is a motel that was sadly torn down a couple of years ago. I'm glad I got a picture of it before it was, but this could be in Los Angeles, Las Vegas, even a lot of places, but it's drawing on your mid-century modern Guji architecture, doo-wop architecture. What I really want to leave you with is the idea that our affinity for tiki culture is not strictly an affinity, for authentic Polynesian or Hawaiian culture. It's not authentic at all. And our affinity for it now is not even really looking at those original cultures as much as looking at what was wrought out of them by people like Don the Beachcomber and Trader Vic. This is a picture a bartender took of me on a slow night in this tiki bar that was open in the 2000s in Daytona. And it's meant to be retro. And he said so. This is meant so people my generation, of a younger generation, can actually experience a tiki bar like their parents or grandparents would have gone to. So it's really not so much referential of Polynesian culture as much as American tiki culture and the American mid-20th century. And nowhere do we see this better than at Cabana Bay Beach Resort. This isn't in Daytona. This is at Universal Studios Orlando. It's a Lowe's hotel property. It was opened in the 2000s. And it is 120% Guji doo-wop architecture. It is the idea of bringing your family on vacation to Universal Studios and experiencing what a vacation resort would have been like in the 1950s. And on those large screen televisions, you see in the middle of their cafeteria, they have an endless loop of commercials, not the cartoons themselves, but commercials from Saturday morning kids TV from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which is really, you could probably write a whole paper on that. But I want you to think about the idea of going for nostalgia, and that nostalgia necessarily sometimes being a place that never existed, a place that was a construct of its own. And we see that with this Polynesian tropicality that we see in so much mid-20th century Florida resort architecture, but we also see it in this sort of revival of capturing that mid-20th century. This is something now we can be nostalgic for all on its own. So I leave you with those ideas. I thank you for coming for my presentation. I also thank these wonderful people and institutions listed here for all their help. It's been an honor to be here, and I hope the rest of the conference is great for everyone. Thank you.